before I get started here, I do want to just relay that this presentation is intended only to summarize the ARPA-E SCALEUP funding process and program. As such, the FOA language is controlling. And if you'd like more detailed information, you are more than welcome to review the FOA materials. We have links to these resources at the end of the presentation. I can still hear background noise, so if folks could mute their lines, that would be great. So last but not least, before I get started, we do want to hear your questions today. We ask that you please stay muted, however. What we'd like to see is your questions either through the WebEx chat bar. Do recognize, though, that these are going to be viewable to everyone on the phone today. Alternatively, you can also submit your questions to the ARPA-E comms email address. That's at arpae-comms@hq.doe.gov. You can put SCALEUP webinar in the subject line there, and we'll be monitoring that inbox throughout today's presentation. So once I am through the presentation, I'm hoping we still have a little bit of time. We'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can on the line today, but we will be providing written responses to all questions we receive. So we'll be drafting those in a webinar Q&A document, and we will be distributing that via email to everyone on the phone today. That document is also going to be posted on ARPA-E's Exchange as well as the SCALEUP website. So in addition to that document, we are also going to be posting these slides, and there will be a recording as well, I am hoping. And again, reference to any of the links that we have in the deck today, those will all be in the slides, so you can reference those later. Okay, so that should be all the public announcements that I have for now. I am going to try to remember you all to remind you to periodically send us your questions. So with that, I'm going to get started. To give you all a quick review of what I'm going over today, the purpose and focus is to review ARPA-E's new SCALEUP program. So SCALEUP, which stands for Seeding Critical Advances for Leading Energy Technologies with Untapped Potential, was officially launched in December, and this program has really been a long time in the making. It's worth noting up front that today's talk is designed for industry and investors. You all are extremely important to SCALEUP, so we want to give you a direct line to ask us questions. So all of our topics today are catered for you. With that in mind, just to touch on the planned agenda, first I'll introduce who I am, as well as the rest of ARPA-E's SCALEUP team. Then we will go into some background on the motivation for the SCALEUP program. Then comes some FOA process discussion, and lastly, I'm going to dive into some of the program details as well as some key partnering information that we think you should know. For there, I'm just going to wrap some things up. We'll go over some of the helpful resources, and then from there, hopefully we'll have some time, a little bit of time at least, for Q&A. So a little bit about ARPA-E SCALEUP team. So on the far left, that is me. As I said before, my name is Mary Yamada. I'm a tech-to-market advisor here at ARPA-E. I recently celebrated my one-year anniversary here at ARPA-E, and the creation and development of SCALEUP has really been what I eat, breathe, and dream about for the majority of that time. I am not alone, however, and involvement from James Zaylor, Pat McGrath, Madhav Antaria has been critical to the SCALEUP program. This has really been a team effort here at ARPA-E, and there are many others here within the SCALEUP sphere that have really been essential to making this program a reality. So, surprise, I actually have one more public service announcement. And at this point, you should probably just be thinking of this presentation as ARPA-E's version of the Super Bowl, and as this slide as our version of a Tide ad. I imagine legal will also want me to say that ARPA-E is in no way endorsing the Super Bowl or Tide, but I would like you to think, what I would like you to think is my jokes are very well timed and very well planned, and we are certainly don't want you to worry about those, however. What we do hope you get is to please hope that you mark your calendars for the SCALEUP Workshop. This event is critical to the SCALEUP program, and this is where we'll be having our top 20 or so companies and teams pitching to industry and investors. This event is scheduled for May 20th and will be held at SLAC in Menlo Park. I am going to be speaking more about the SCALEUP Workshop throughout the talk today, but I wanted to highlight up front that this is really an event that you can't miss. So I did first want to give you guys some background on why ARPA-E created the SCALEUP program and why it really is a big priority for us. So to explain the motivation for the SCALEUP program, I think it's first helpful to look at how technologies develop, and in particular, how they are developed at ARPA-E. As shown here, we can loosely describe how far a technology has progressed based on how cost decreases relative to performance increases. So for purposes of today's webinar, we can call this our learning curve rate. And what we want is for this rate to decrease relative to increasing scale. So now that I've explained a little bit about the axes here in this cartoon, at ARPA-E, our primary R&D programs are early stage and generally reside very close to the beginning of a technology's development track. As such, we are placing our dollars on high-risk technologies that we think have the potential to surpass existing tech, both in terms of lower cost and higher performance. Just a quick reminder, if folks could please mute their lines, that would be great. So, since we here at ARPA-E, we deal in high risk, we do anticipate failure. And to be honest, the majority of our projects do fail to progress. However, some do overcome these early stage R&D challenges and are able to demonstrate a true path to market. These successful technologies that come out of our primary R&D programs overcome not just the high bar that we set for technical performance and implementation, but are also able to assemble the right team to accomplish the task. So then what happens is the ARPA-E project ends. There's all of this momentum, and then what? I can say as a tech-to-market advisor here at ARPA-E, we work extremely hard to help our teams think through next steps. We work diligently to help guide them through securing follow-on funds, but the reality is this is really, really hard, and it's especially hard for energy technologies where investment risk tolerances are often much lower. And this has led to an enduring problem we have here at ARPA-E, where some of our most promising and most potentially disruptive technologies, they just get stranded. And this is certainly not always the case. We have some seriously scrappy companies that come out of our programs, and they truly defy all odds. But many of our teams face a void of funding, and we often hear from private sector that the remaining technical and developmental risks that are associated with scaling these technologies is just too great. But I do have some good news. We think we can help get these technologies through the scaling gap. This is a true ARPA-E hard problem here, and at ARPA-E we pride ourselves in eating hard problems for breakfast as long as they don't involve WebEx. And the breakfast choice here at ARPA-E is pushing learning curves for new and disruptive energy tech. So what we want to do is take ARPA-E primary R&D model and apply and modify this to fund high-risk and high-reward technology scaling. This is the premise and core of our new SCALEUP program. What we understand, not just through our own experiences here at ARPA-E, but also through discussions that we've had with industry and investors, is that these high-risk advancements are very critical to proving that early-stage technologies that they can compete with existing tech. Therefore, SCALEUP is really designed to fund these pre-commercial scaling projects. The idea is that successful SCALEUP projects will sufficiently de-risk these technologies, and this will give them the push they need to realize their disruptive potential.
No, I'm not.
Just a quick reminder, If you guys can mute, that would be great. Thanks so much.
What?
So,
yeah.
Another important metric to consider for the SCALEUP program is how we anticipate investment to change as a technology progresses through its development track.
What's the big company that you found?
And what we expect is for ARPA-E investment to focus on the early stage and high risk that is too early for private sector.
Okay.
So while ARPA-E's investment, as I said, focuses on the early stage and high risk, that is too early for private sector investment, as these technical and manufacturing reliability challenges are addressed, that risk goes down. And we're hoping that outside investment is going to increase at this point. And it's in this kind of handoff space between ARPA-E and the private sector where we want the program SCALEUP to sit. Now, everything I've just shown you is definitely an oversimplified cartoon, but I hope this starts to give you a sense for the motivation and objective of SCALEUP. So now just to talk a little bit about how our motivation translates into a physical program. So here's just the 1,000-foot view of the SCALEUP program. First off, SCALEUP is in pilot mode, and we want this to be a program that is run regularly here at ARPA-E, but we are trying out a lot of new stuff here. This is our first ever scaling and pre-pilot focused program, and since it's the first, we are only considering technologies that have successfully made it through ARPA-E's primary R&D programs. It is possible we may open it up to non-ARPA-E funded tech in future iterations, but for now, the technology has to come from ARPA-E's 10-year portfolio. In terms of program size, we've made $50 million available for 5 to 8 selected teams and $1 to $10 million of federal dollars available per team. So this is big money in general terms and really goes beyond what ARPA-E offers through a primary R&D program. But because we are putting greater federal dollars on the line, we are asking for greater cost share at the 50% level. Another important program feature to highlight is that encouraging small business participation has been a huge focus for this program. To do this, we've included mechanisms such as reduced cost share as well as grant funds. These will be awarded during phase 2 of the FOA process. And the goal here is to help prop up startups and small businesses and level the playing field a bit against bigger and more well-financed companies and organizations. So that was a quick overview of the SCALEUP motivation and the main program features. And before I jump into the next section, just a quick reminder, you can submit your questions via the WebEx chat feature. Just a reminder, though, this is non-confidential, so it will be seen by everyone else on the chat today. Alternatively, you can email those to the comms email box. So let's go. Let's now move into a bit of the FOA process. So just to take a step back for a second and make sure you all know the terminology here, FOA stands for Funding Opportunity Announcement, and this is the mechanism we use here at ARPA-E to select and award funding. The figure on this slide summarizes the main phases of the SCALEUP FOA, and it's worth noting this process is pretty different from the one we use for our primary R&D programs, and as such, I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of walking you through it. So first off, the SCALEUP FOA has 3 phases, and each is followed by an elimination round. This includes 2 down selects and then 1 selection phase. So this is 3 elimination rounds in total. To compare this to the process we use for our primary R&D programs, for those, we don't have any down select rounds. And after full applications are due, ARPA-E goes right into making selections. So that's one of the key differences here to notice. So to move back to where we are in this process, we actually just finished up the first phase. So we are here where preliminary applications were due on February 14th, and we're actually in a down select segment now. So we're in the process of selecting our semifinalists to enter phase 2. and we will be notifying those applicants that have made it to that round on April 20th. So moving into phase 2, this is the segment that is particularly important for our industry and investor folks on the line. I will be going into more details on what you can expect here, but the main 2 things for you to remember for phase 2 are, first, we have the May 20th workshop, which I had highlighted before, and we will be talking much more about this as we go through the talk. And second, that full application submissions are due on July 20th. That's roughly about 5 months from now. So the July 20th date is important because in order for our semifinalists to be selected through to phase 3, which is the finalist round, they must have partners. And I'll be explaining more about these partner requirements, but to finish out the timeline here, another unique feature of the SCALEUP FOA is that after we select our finalists, we require them to visit ARPA-E to pitch their project, and this is through oral presentations. Because we envision higher investment levels from ARPA-E into these SCALEUP projects, we want to see and interact with our finalist teams before we award them. And then the last step here is selections and award negotiations, which are anticipated to be between December of this year and March 2021. Okay, so that's a quick review of the motivation for SCALEUP as well as the FOA process. I'd like to dive into some more details of the program itself, but again, just another reminder, please submit your questions. So one of the things you all have hopefully caught on to is that small business, company, and industry participation is really at the core of the SCALEUP program. Since we want this program to transition ARPA-E funded tech from the lab and from bench scale prototypes to the market and into the hands of the private sector, we've designed the program to target those we think can do this best, which is companies and industry. I do want to mention here that we are not accepting teams led by universities or national labs. These folks can participate, however, they can participate as subs or they can license their technology. We want company and industry-led teams for SCALEUP, so that is kind of the reasoning behind that eligibility criteria. Another thing to highlight is that companies that apply, they must own or control subject inventions or software that has come from an ARPA-E award. And generally what this means in layman's terms is that SCALEUP technologies must have been developed through ARPA-E funding, and they must have developed something worth protecting. Lastly, I've mentioned this a few times now. I've mentioned partnering, and that's because it's a requirement of SCALEUP. We view this as essential to the success of these projects, and as such, our applicants must obtain at least one letter of intent from a potential customer, an end user, this could be a supplier, or really any other value chain entity within the target industry. The idea here is that we want to see proof from industry and investors that they have confidence in the technology's potential and are willing to absorb some of the investment risk along with ARPA-E. So to give you all a visual for how these SCALEUP teams might look, we envision that the folks leading these teams, our prime applicants, will mostly be startups and small businesses. And I am excited to say that based on what we see from the preliminary applications, this is indeed the case. The vast majority of applicants to SCALEUP are small business led. However, I do want to acknowledge the large and medium-sized businesses as well as nonprofits. We have received proposals from them, and we do have confidence that these folks also have the potential to pump out some real quality work through SCALEUP. So moving down to the sub-applicants in the gray bar, this is where we expect to see universities and national labs participating. However, we definitely expect to see small businesses and large businesses, and as well as nonprofits, coming in at the sub-level. Just for reference, any of the example organizations I show here at the prime level, they can also participate as a sub. Lastly, when we think about what our SCALEUP teams look like, we want to see industry and investor partners. And as shown in the orange bar, these can be VCs, they can be corporate investors or OEMs, they can be suppliers, and these are just a few examples. I'll get into more about the role of partners that they play later, but I certainly want to emphasize that we see having industry and investor partners as essential. And this component is actually just now kicking into high gear since we are about to enter phase 2, which is the semi-finalist stage of SCALEUP. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about what ARPA-E wants our applicants and teams to look like. When we think about the types of projects we want and expect to see, the focus is on pre-commercial scaling. We want to see focus on improving things like technology integration. We also want them building capacity. So can we go from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts? Or can we go from 100 widgets to 1,000? We also want projects that provide extended performance data, since this will help validate the technology's potential. Also, proving things out like the manufacturability and reliability of these new technologies is also extremely important for SCALEUP. And ideally, what we want for the SCALEUP program, we want this to be ARPA-E's last touch point with the technology. So the idea being, at the end of a successful SCALEUP project, we want the team and the technology ready for substantial private sector investment. We believe that after SCALEUP, that the private sector capital can take the technology through to early commercialization. So now that I've gone over who the SCALEUP applicants are, their possible team compositions, and also the types of projects, another question I get asked frequently is what technologies will SCALEUP fund? And the short answer is there are a lot of possibilities. On this slide, I've tried to capture some of the expected candidates, and I've organized these into 8 general technology buckets. And while I can't really speak with any certainty here, we do have some idea of what we expect to see with SCALEUP. And this is because, as I mentioned before, the pool of possible technologies is limited to those that ARPA-E has funded. So, for instance, technologies focused on wide bandgap power switching devices are certainly a possibility. Also, low-E coatings and materials for Windows. We also wouldn't be surprised to see projects that focus on connected and automated vehicle systems. And it's impossible for me to speculate on which of these are going to make it through, but at least here I hope you start to get a bit of a ballpark view of what is possible. So another aspect of the SCALEUP program that's worth discussing is the evaluation criteria. We use the same criteria areas to select semifinalists and finalists, as well as for making our final awards. While the criteria remains the same for each of these steps, the stakes get higher as we go, and our questions are definitely going to get a lot harder. But the 3 criteria include project feasibility and technical merit, commercial viability, strategy and impact, and lastly, team qualifications, experience, and capabilities. For SCALEUP, we've really elevated the importance of the go-to-market and team composition aspects. For our primary R&D programs, technical merit usually holds the most weight, but for SCALEUP, we believe it's extremely important that each of these criteria are considered equally. So, before I go into the next section, I did want to just do a quick recap and also a bit of word association. So, when you think about who the SCALEUP applicants are, remember that they are mostly small businesses. When it comes to these small businesses and their teams, please remember that they need industry and investor partners. In terms of the desired SCALEUP projects, remember the focus is on pre-commercial scaling. And when it comes to technologies, the key word to remember is broad. We've got a lot of good possible candidates within the ARPA-E technology sphere. And lastly, when you think of the SCALEUP criteria, remember that the technical, market, and team aspects are considered to be equally important. Okay, again, remember to submit your questions. I'm going to dive deeper now into the role and expectations for our potential partners. We've got about 10 minutes left here or so until we start the Q&A. So I have talked a lot about this, and I can't emphasize enough that our semifinalists need partners. And the FOA includes both required and optional partnering, so let's talk a little bit about the differences here. ARPA-E requires that our semifinalists have at least one commercialization partner. The definition here is broad, and the idea is we want our semifinalists to partner with potential customers, end users, suppliers. This could also be manufacturers, distributors, or even corporate investors. We want these commercialization partners to represent the viewpoint and needs of the target industry. The idea being is that this will help ensure that the SCALEUP technologies are commercially adopted if and when they are successful. We would also like to see our semifinalists pursue what we call financial partners. And these can be investors, they can be incubators and accelerators, among others. And while these are not required, if a SCALEUP company has both categories of partners, this is something ARPA-E will consider, and it will factor into our selection decisions. So now that we've talked about who falls into which partner category, let's talk a little bit about partner responsibilities, because there are some similarities and some differences between each. Generally, we want all partners, both commercialization and financial, to commit to taking on investment risk. And we'd like to see this commitment through letters of intent. So these letters of intent, or LOIs, they should be between you and the semifinalist that you're partnering with. These LOIs also need to be included within the semifinalist full application submission, and that's due, as I had mentioned before, on July 20th. So this represents the most immediate responsibility that you'd have as a potential SCALEUP partner. The idea here is that we want you to commit to provide cost share as well, and this is the other similarity between the partnering categories. So if you remember earlier in this presentation, I discussed the 50% cost share requirement. Our semifinalists are going to definitely need your help to get there. So to just briefly touch on what is cost share, this requirement can be met a variety of ways. This includes cash contributions, as well as providing in kind, and this can be things like equipment, it can be a demonstration site or IP. And unlike the LOIs, which are a relatively near-term requirement, this cost share comes much later. So as I also mentioned before, we don't expect to award these SCALEUP projects until between December 2020 and March 2021. So this gives you guys quite a bit of time to vet any semifinalist team that you wish to partner with. So again, down at the bottom here, I do want to highlight how these different partner categories differ. And the main difference is how we anticipate each to interact with the companies and teams that you're backing once the project is awarded. Generally, we anticipate that commercialization partners will be actively participating on the project, and this is because they are more likely to be providing things like manufacturing guidance as well as specialized expertise and feedback. Since financial partners, who we expect largely to be comprised of investors, we don't necessarily anticipate the same active involvement. This active versus inactive participation is the difference between the two categories. However, I should definitely highlight that these are what we expect and are by no means rigid constraints. So to go over some important upcoming milestones for folks interested in becoming a SCALEUP partner, first, as a reminder, we've passed phase 1 and preliminary applications were submitted on the 14th of February. But please do not worry, you have not missed the boat. It's not until phase 2 where we require partnering. So as a potential partner, the next milestone to keep in mind is that we will be announcing semifinalists in late April. And this will be for any semifinalist that wants some publicity from ARPA-E. So for these semifinalists that opt in, we'll be putting out email alerts. We're also going to send announcements through our monthly newsletter. We are also planning to send an email directly to all who registered to the webinar today. The next item to be aware of is that we will be publishing profiles in early May. These will be going on the SCALEUP webpage, and we expect these profiles to include the semifinalist organization or company name, as well as a bio with a description of the tech and the project. We also plan to provide contact information to make it clear which teams and companies want and need partners. So lastly here, all these near-term milestones are leading us to the SCALEUP Workshop on May 20th. And hopefully, these different milestones that we've outlined here are going to make it useful for you to decide who and you might want to consider partnering with at the workshop. So I have mentioned the workshop several times now, and we really do hope you attend. This event is extremely exciting for us here at ARPA-E, and it's only gotten more so now that we've started to look at the applications we've received. And I can tell you, our semifinalists really will be the best of ARPA-E's 10-year history. We are extremely excited. So to briefly just go over some of the logistics, this is going to be a one-day pitching and networking event, and it is going to be held at SLAC in Menlo Park, California. And the focus here is really going to be on our semifinalists. And we want to give our potential partners the opportunity to meet with as many of them as possible all in one place. I do want to note that the workshop is invite only, so please do reach out to us if you want to attend. We are planning to send out invitations soon. So I should also highlight too, we actually now have a website for the workshop specifically, and this was published this morning. I am fist pumping right now as I speak. This is a small win in a webinar disaster day. So I can at least claim that victory for the day. We do have links for that on the resource slide, which is coming up shortly. So before I go into the Q&A, I just have 2 more slides, and I wanted to wrap things up by reviewing why you should partner with our semifinalist teams. One of the main reasons is this program was designed through your input. We've hosted roundtable meetings, we published an RFI to get input from investors, industry, as well as potential applicants. And the input we received from them was on how we should develop and organize the SCALEUP funding program to take our ARPA-E technologies to the next level. And with that feedback in mind, we are really focused on encouraging small business participation. And we want to focus the SCALEUP R&D efforts to further de-risk these disruptive and impactful technologies. Another critical aspect that I want to highlight is that we are evaluating applicants on the market potential of their technology as well as their team composition. And these components are weighted equally against the technical competencies that ARPA-E traditionally looks for. I also want to emphasize that we are doing our very best to provide contractual flexibility. This is government, so we can only go so far. But this program cannot succeed without participation from industry and investors, so we have tried to make this a priority. Lastly, with the preliminary applications now in, I can't emphasize enough regarding how extremely excited we are here at ARPA-E. This program is truly going to be supporting the very best of ARPA-E tech. And with that, I can't believe it. We actually made it to the end. I was not sure for a little while there. But before we go to the Q&A, just to direct you all where you can find some more information, we do have a web page for SCALEUP. Please take a look there. Again, if you are interested in attending the workshop, and we really think you should be, please email us. You can use the same email address that I've been flashing on the screen for this entire webinar. As I mentioned before, the workshop website is also now live. We've got that link here, so please visit that. You can find resources there about getting an invite as well. And lastly, there is the FOA, so you can also review that if you're interested in more of the details. So that is all I have. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this has been useful for you all. Again, my name is Mary Yamada. We've got about 6 minutes left, so I am happy to try to answer some questions. I know we did get some questions ahead of time, so I'm actually going to go through some of those first, and then hopefully we've got a question team here. I'm hoping that they're going to run those over my way any minute now. It looks like they have. How wonderful. Cool. All right. So one of the questions that we did get was regarding TRLs. So what TRL is expected to receive SCALEUP funds? And this is a question that I think is worth explaining, just because here at ARPA-E we generally don't think about TRLs. It's not terminology we kind of keep in our mental toolbox. And this is because at ARPA-E, we really look at a variety of different technologies, and each has kind of different stages of commercialization and what you would call kind of a TRL. And for things like SCALEUP, we are evaluating a broad set of technologies. So I think to just put a single number on that would be challenging. I think it's, again, worth highlighting that we're looking for technologies that have already demonstrated proof of concept. So if that's the technology, then that's something we're interested in looking at. Let's see, what other questions have we gotten in here? Okay, so is the ARPA-E research funding provided up front? And if not, how is it provided? This is a good question, and generally, this is how ARPA-E we treat all of our funding, regardless of whether it's for our primary R&D programs or for SCALEUP. And ARPA-E disperses funds to project teams as cost reimbursement, and this is after the actual work is performed. We do encourage monthly invoicing, but it is required at least a quarterly time interval. All right. This is such a strange experience since you guys are all muted, so I'm just going to keep going and answering questions. And again, I do actually should remind folks that, as I said in the beginning, we are going to be compiling questions, and we will be sending out a Q&A document to all the webinar registrants. So if I don't happen to read your exact question on the line today, do not fret. We will be compiling and sending answers out later. Okay. So another question we're getting here, which is a good one. How many applications were received in the first round, and how many will be down selected? So I am happy to report that we got over 100 preliminary applications. So those are the ones that we received and also found to be compliant and responsive. It's uncertain, but we are anticipating selecting possibly 20 to 30 semifinalists. So these would be the folks potentially that you all will be seeing at the workshop in May. Good question here. So can we get company info before going for the workshop? Yes. I'm hoping I answered this question in the presentation today, but yes, we are definitely planning to announce semifinalists, particularly all of those who will be participating in the workshop. As I mentioned too, we do want to provide some profiles on these semifinalists and definitely keep a lookout for those on the web page. Both the SCALEUP page and the workshop page, they should be posted in both locations. What else do we have here? So, are you looking for investor syndicates or single investors for whole round? So we're not focused on any particular round of financing. So rather, ARPA-E is focusing on discrete projects, and we really welcome all investors and partners to meet project goals. So we're really not focused on any particular round there. I've got another question here asking if we can elaborate a little bit on reliability. So the question says, currently industry has a need for good commercially available tool, for a good commercially available tool that is capable of dealing with all kinds of uncertainty related to system changes and renewables. So, you know, reliability, that's a tough thing to answer just because I think it is extremely technology specific. So it's tough to kind of comment on, you know, without the context of a particular preliminary application, but certainly is a good question, you know, when we start to explore on any individual project. I think this is roughly all of the questions that we were able to compile in the time that we had while I was speaking. So again, as I said before, if I didn't get a chance to answer your question, we will be compiling these and providing answers. Thank you all so much for bearing with this fun experience. I use fun in air quotes for those of you who cannot see me, which hopefully is no one. But anyways, without further ado, again, thank you so much. That concludes today's webinar. And we look forward to connecting with you all again, hopefully at the workshop. Thanks so much. Bye.